Welcome back. Bill Paxton sadly died in 2017 at the age of 61, but I doubt anyone will ever forget him, having fully ingrained himself into popular culture. Firstly, by being one of the few actors to get killed by a Terminator, a Predator, and a Xenomorph, but also coining the ever-useful phrase,
"Game over, man! It's game over!"
Bill Paxton had a huge and successful career as an actor. However, I believe today's film will prove that he was just as good a director, if not more so. Bill Paxton only directed 2 films in his lifetime. The Greatest Game Ever Played, an uplifting biographical drama which was made for Disney about American golfer Francis Ouimet, starring Shia LaBeouf. And today's movie, Frailty, which is very much not a Disney film, being a dark and brutal film about serial killers starring a quite young Matthew McConaughey, which is quite the juxtaposition, I must say. And chances are you've not heard of Frailty, because it's one of those films that just fell by the wayside, sadly. But hopefully this video will serve as an example of why this film shouldn't be ignored, and why Bill Paxton should have directed more films. We begin with ominous music and brief glimpses of newspaper clippings. We don't learn much, but we can make out a few details about grisly murders, 6 victims, and then it specifically mentions the God's Hand killer. Firstly, it's ironic that one of the proposed titles for this film in another region was The Devil's Hand. But also, this opening might seem insignificant, because the stuff it's telling us we'll soon learn in the film. However, what it's really doing is it's emphasizing the God's Hand killer and showing that they are the focus of the film, because in reality, it might be a bit more complicated than that. After the credits, we open on a building being told it's the Dallas, Texas headquarters of the FBI. Eagle-eyed viewers of this channel and comic book movies in general will notice that that location, Los Angeles Center Studios, was used for Ravenscar Hospital in the Constantine film. But hey, we've already had mentions of God and the devil. A reference to Constantine was all but inevitable. And in a rather weird coincidence, there is an ambulance outside the building, which genuinely confused me a little the first time I watched this, and thinking this was a hospital despite being told it wasn't. We will find out why there is an ambulance there soon. We then meet one of our main characters, Detective Doyle, played by Powers Booth. He's been called into the office by his partner because a man has said he has information on the God's Hand case. Doyle meets with the man and notice how the detective's handshake is subtly avoided, and instead the man hands a picture of Doyle's mother from his desk. Both these details will be important later. The man introduces himself as Fenton Meeks, and he doesn't just have information, he tells Doyle he knows exactly who the God's Hand killer is. Obviously Doyle is very skeptical, but humours Fenton, who doesn't beat around the bush. He reveals his brother is the God's Hand killer. We then flash back to the night before, where Fenton received a phone call from his brother, Adam, telling him how demons are taking over the world, that he can't destroy them all, and he cryptically tells Fenton to take him to the Rose Garden, before hanging up and shooting himself in the head. Doyle remains skeptical about Fenton, not really seeing a correlation, but Fenton says he isn't finished yet, and there's a lot more of the story to be told. So Doyle quite wisely calls the sheriff in the town Adam and Fenton came from, Meat. Yeah, the town is called Meat. Which is a great made-up Texas town name. It certainly sounds plausible, and it also has a strange, uncomfortable edge to it. The sheriff is currently out of the office, but the woman on the phones confirms that Fenton stole an ambulance and his brother's body, convincing Doyle. But he does ask Fenton why he's confessing all this now. Fenton ignores the question, however, and asks about Doyle's picture of his mother again, making sure we remember that for later, before his story flashbacks to 1979. Now, that was a lot of information all at once, and we will get all the context for it. But one thing this opening 10 minutes shows is how this film is designed to be watched multiple times. Because all those things I told you to remember for later, they take on a very different meaning once you've seen the film. It's very clever. So anyway, in 1979, we meet a young Fenton and his younger brother Adam as they walk home from school, showing that perhaps Adam is the more religious of the two boys, as he sings Joy Down in My Heart while getting the reluctant Fenton to join in. Also make note of this part.
And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on a tap. Ouch.
This one might not be intended by the film, but remember it for later. I will refer back to it. And of course, it's important to note they're walking through the very rose garden that Adam told Fenton to take him to, and that happens to be where the boys lived, just at the back. The boys get home and we meet their mechanic father, who's also played by Bill Paxton. And while the family eat, there's the typical conversations with Fenton saying he's struggling with maths, and his dad telling him they'll figure it out together. This is all to emphasise that they are a loving family. We get to see them interact normally, so when what happens, we can see how it changes them. Also, strangely, Bill Paxton's character doesn't have a name. He's only credited as Dad Meeks. I don't know if there's a real reason for that, but to me, it possibly emphasises how much Fenton is in control of the narrative here. He never calls his dad anything but Dad, and thus he has no name. After dinner, there's more family stuff of the dad joking around and tucking the boys into sleep, and Fenton narrates how happy they were together. So of course, this is where everything goes to hell. Also, the boys argue about which movie to see the next day, and originally in the script, Fenton wanted to see Alien, but obviously Paxton changed it to The Warriors to not be self-referential. And this is where it comes crashing down, as their dad wakes them up in the middle of the night in a panic, and he rather casually informs them that he's been given a vision from God. Another flashback occurs as we see Dad Meeks wake up, and then a trophy depicting an angel becomes unbelievably bright, giving him his information. Now, what I love about that is, firstly, we really don't know what happened, because remember, this is still just Fenton's story. But if it did happen the way he tells it, then you could easily see that as some kind of undiagnosed neural issue messing with his brain. It's still open to a lot of interpretation. So when Dad Meeks explains that God told him the end of the world is coming, demons are amongst them, and God will give them the tools to fight and destroy these demons, calling themselves God's hand, we're hardly going to readily believe him, are we? And that is what makes the movie interesting, because it gives you all the information required to believe him, and if you do, the following events will be far less horrific. However, it leaves just the right amount of doubt that if you don't believe him 100%, the film becomes very uncomfortable. And it's clear that Adam blindly believes his father, but Fenton, thinking more logically, says it doesn't make any sense. So their dad also says they will receive magical weapons to destroy the demons with, which I'm sure will look like magical divine weapons as opposed to random found objects. Their dad tries to reassure them, but Fenton is quite overwhelmed to say the least, and a clever piece of camera work exemplifies this. We can see how this family is slowly moving away from each other, as the camera moves away and separates Fenton from Adam and his father. It's a nice, subtle use of visual metaphor. The next morning, Fenton and Adam wake up and all seems normal again, with their dad seemingly acting like it never happened. But when he tells them to keep the night before a secret, that fantasy is soon shattered. Fenton narrates how he refused to believe what was happening, but then we hear about his dad starting to find his magical weapons. Again, it needs to be pointed out that we don't know if this is what really happened, but we see Dad Meeks driving on his way to work when he sees a literal God ray directing him to an old barn, and inside he finds a two-headed axe and some gloves waiting for him. Now, weirdly, that specific type of axe is known as a felling axe. It's designed to chop down trees. And if you look at where it was found, there's not a tree for miles. So that could potentially point to it being placed there by some divine hand. Also, you'll notice the axe has the name of Otis carved into the handle, and there's lots of speculation on what that might mean. One theory is that Otis is the dad's real name, which would certainly bring more credence to the magical idea. Another theory is that it's an acronym for Only the Innocent Survive. In reality, Bill Paxton chose to give the axe a name, firstly to imbue it with a kind of personality, but also to make it a distinctive and recognisable heirloom, so we'd know it was an axe passed down from father to son. Also, in a nice story about Bill Paxton, when he was scouting for locations in Pasadena, he found a homeless man by the name of Otis. And because this homeless man didn't want any charity, Paxton offered to pay him for the use of his name in this film. Later that evening, the last of the magical items have been recovered, and this time it's just a metal pipe. At least the axe had something distinctive about it. The pipe doesn't really make a convincing case. His dad can see that Fenton is uneasy about what's happening and talks to him about it, but compared from before his vision, he's much more stern and less caring, telling Fenton that he must obey God's will. Fenton quite rightly suggests that his dad might not be right in the head, his words not mine, but his dad dismisses it as he's been given his first 7 demons to destroy. And we once again flash back to when his dad got the message from the angel, and this time it's far more extravagant than the last vision. As he works on a car, it falls away and a literal flaming sword angel appears. But again, you could still make the case that this is some kind of neurological issue leading to hallucinations and delusions of grandeur. Also, he's seeing actual angels now, because the first time he received these messages, he wasn't expecting it. But this time, he knew exactly what he was looking for, and his mind informed the hallucination accordingly. That is, of course, only one theory. But of course, the horrific part of all this is those names Fenton's dad gave him are names of people. But according to his dad, they're demons, and when he places his hands on these people, that's when they'll be revealed, hence the magic gloves. Fenton's schoolwork continues to be affected as he starts falling asleep in class, only to be woken up by a nightmare of his axe-wielding father. Adult Fenton narrates that his younger self was resolved to try and stop his father, but couldn't bring himself to tell someone about it. Yet. At home, Adam gives his dad his own list of demons to destroy, which is just kids who are bullying him at school. And an interesting distinction is made. Their father specifically says they can only destroy demons and not kill people. It's surprising how quickly and completely convinced he is that the people he's planning to kill aren't in any way human. But of course, considering what happens in the future, it's not a surprise that Adam is so completely convinced of his father's stories. The next evening, the boy's father doesn't return home, and before sleeping, Fenton tries to convince Adam that it's all make-believe and that they have to leave, warning him that their dad will kill somebody. But Adam doesn't believe him, even smiling like it's a joke. At this point, I should mention that the film's title, Frailty, is never actually mentioned and doesn't really have a direct, recognisable reason why it's called that. But there are 2 completely different reasons. To the writer, frailty refers to the slow disintegration of a family. But to Bill Paxton, frailty refers to the incredibly small budget that the film had. That night, Fenton is woken up by his father coming home, who's carrying something quite large over his shoulder. Fenton goes to see what's happened, and this moment of Fenton finding his father and then the camera panning down to a kidnapped and bound woman is what made many test audience members leave the cinema. Which is just baffling to me. If you're there to test a film, give feedback for God's sake. If you're just going to walk out, then why show up in the first place? I'm not sure why this annoyed me so much, but hey, at least the film didn't get changed due to bad testers. Adam joins everyone outside, and their dad takes the woman in the shed. He tells them that she is indeed a demon, and to not be afraid, and once again, we flash back seeing what their father went through. As he gets a message, this time nowhere near as over the top as the last one, and he's able to find the woman he was looking for, despite never setting foot in the town where she lived, or knowing who she was. And using the pipe, he has no issues knocking the woman out. And back in the shed, Fenton tries to tell him to stop, but he's pretty convinced of his duty. We then move back to the present. Doyle is pretty shocked at what he's hearing, and we also find out that the boy's father is now dead. It's then Doyle's partner comes in to clock off for the night, checking if Doyle needs assistance, looking at Fenton before leaving, and then we go back to the past. Now that seemed pretty irrelevant, just stopping the narrative for no discernible reason, but, say it with me now, it'll be important later. Fenton explains that his dad believed if he placed his hands on a demon, it would reveal them, so when the dad touches the woman, something strange happens. We don't see anything, but both the dad and the woman freak out as if something is happening between them. Of course, it could just be a "this crazy person is grabbing me" kind of reaction. But this seems to be all the evidence their father needs to kill the woman and then bury her in the rose garden. And it's pretty damn dark to see him instruct his son on the proper way to dispose of pieces of a body. Fenton is obviously distraught and crying. Their dad was hoping that they would see the same visions of the demon that he got. Fenton didn't see anything, but Adam says he did. But of course, we don't know if he really did see something, or he's just being a child trying to do right for his father. Also, originally, Bill Paxton wanted to give a definitive answer to the vision question immediately, but due to a suggestion from James Cameron of all people, it was changed to make the film far more ambiguous. His dad tells Fenton that next time he'll see the same visions, and even though Fenton warns him he'll go to the police, his father says that will cause someone to die, as the angel told him it would. That's enough to keep Fenton quiet for now as we move back to the FBI once again. And now we learn about the modern-day God's Hand killer. Only one of the bodies of the 6 victims was ever found. For the other victims, they only ever found notes saying that God's hand has taken them. Although, I do need to point out that the newspaper clippings during the opening credits clearly states second victim found. So that's a pretty big continuity error. Fenton suggests that the missing bodies might be located in the rose garden, so Doyle firstly makes sure Fenton handcuffs himself, and then they're off to see for themselves. And Fenton rejects help from Doyle getting into the car, once again avoiding being touched by him. While driving, they start talking again, and this scene is where the cinematography and the effects shine, because the lights moving past the car and the rain moving against the windows is all artificially done. A lot of the time when a car needs to look like it's moving, it's obvious that it isn't. But here, I was convinced this was a moving car. It was so seamlessly done. It's one of those effects that's so well executed, you don't even know it's an effect. So that's the effects covered. On the cinematography side, as Fenton and the detective talk, at first, the detective is on one side of the cage, and we see Fenton through the grate. However, when Fenton once again asks about the picture of Doyle's mother and why he only kept one, the cage almost disappears for the rest of the conversation, letting us see how the power dynamic between these two men has shifted, because Fenton is no longer safely behind a barrier to Doyle. We don't know why yet, but I like to think on some subconscious level we can feel that. Doyle says that the picture was taken a few days before his mother was killed by someone, and the killer was never caught. And Doyle compliments Fenton on his interrogation skills, and he says,
"You know, you're pretty good at this. You ever think about becoming a cop?"
I promise all these little threads will start getting resolved eventually. I just want to impress on you how much this film reveals and sets up its plot without us even realizing it. Doyle still thinks Fenton is hiding something, but gets him to continue his story. After the murder, things get back to normal. A whole month goes by without much happening, except that Fenton avoids the rose garden now when walking home. Back home, they see a new van outside. Let's just call it their dad's murder truck. And he's planning to destroy another demon tomorrow. The next day, their dad has found his next victim, and according to Fenton's narration, his dad told him that not even a camera will be able to catch them. They are invisible while doing God's work. Now, the obvious question is, how the hell does he know that? But it also shows just how much faith he has in these visions. The angel says he's invisible, and thus he is. There's something truly unsettling about seeing the progression of this completely uncompromising belief. The man thereafter goes into a store, and when he eventually leaves, Fenton notices, but his dad doesn't. There's a nice piece of tension where you can see that he's hoping his dad doesn't see, but unfortunately, he does. Fenton reluctantly does what he's told and pretends to have a lost dog underneath the man's car, and let's be honest, it's clear his tears aren't acting. His dad swiftly knocks the man out and gets him into the truck. Once again, hands are laid upon the victim, and although both men seem to freak out, no visions are seen again. And while burying the man, according to their dad, the man was a child murderer. Which seems like Dad Meeks is moving the goalposts slightly, because at first he was adamant that this would reveal their true form. But now he's saying that they will remain human, but their crimes will be revealed. Which is fortunate for him, because then there's no burden of proof. He can just say they're killers, and that's it. While their dad is away, Fenton once again tries to convince Adam to run away with him, but Adam is completely convinced of his demon-slaying father, even doubling down on saying he also sees the visions. And later at home, Fenton is woken up for a father and son talk, Adam told him what Fenton had said, and this is the first time we see their dad waver in his apparent faith. As he says, the angel told him something about Fenton that he's determined to prove the angel wrong about. And how do you think he's going to do that?
I want you to dig a hole right here.
Dig a big hole, yeah, that'll do it. That'll somehow foil the omniscient, omnipresent machinations of the Lord. You know, I'm starting to question his sanity a little. So Fenton does his digging, being told to pray by his father, but Fenton refuses, and in the narration says he hated God, so quite the opposite intended effect. Adam brings some water for Fenton, even offering to help, but Fenton is angry at both his brother and dad, and that night Fenton comes in for dinner with his hands all cut up from not using gloves. And despite being a murderous potential psychopath, it's clear his father still cares for him. Well, in his own way at least.
I don't want to fight with you, son. I'm not doing this to hurt you. Wish you could understand that.
Here's a bit of an odd detail for you. We heard him open a can of beer there, but there was only ever one can used on set, simply because the brand no longer existed. It's also indicative of the small budget, because they couldn't make a replacement. Anyway, his dad sees Fenton's hands all cut up, telling him to take some time off the big hole and to use gloves. But Fenton refuses, and after 5 days, the big hole is dug. And I have to point out this shot of their dad in the hole. It's quite cleverly done, because the hole is supposed to be 10 foot deep, which can't be done without structural support, so Bill Paxton is actually on his knees, making it look like he's standing on the bottom, and doing a pretty good job, I might add. It's one of those things that unless you're looking for it, you won't see it. So, apologies for breaking that illusion. The hole is eventually reinforced as they're building what their dad calls a basement and what Fenton calls a dungeon, pushing the shed on top of it to hide it with a trapdoor. And he doesn't waste any time putting it to use, bringing in another victim, and this time he wants Fenton to deliver the killing blow. But naturally, Fenton can't do it and runs off to the sheriff's station, with Fenton having to go to the sheriff's house to make his report because he's not in the office. Of course, the sheriff immediately tries to call his dad, as he doesn't believe a word Fenton says. Fenton insists he can show him evidence, so the sheriff quickly drives him home, but he's really just taking him home to his father. And inside, he says he was just about to go fishing when Fenton showed up, and no one else was in the office to hear the confession. So, he doesn't believe the story, is talking with the killer, specifically says there are no other witnesses, and will soon be going on a trip where no one will question where he is. Well, he's dead. Fenton tells him his dad is lying and that he can show him the shed and basement, with his dad being ominously cryptic.
Well, if it has to be done, it has to be done. Does it have to be done?
It's quite creepy how clear it is that he's basically asking Fenton if killing the sheriff needs to be done. Fenton shows the sheriff to the trapdoor, and inside they obviously don't find anything, and the sheriff has seen enough, not even acknowledging Fenton anymore. But while going back upstairs, he's soon, predictably, attacked and killed. And this time, because he's not destroying a demon, Fenton's dad throws up, which really shows how detached he is when doing his usual killings. Now, I could be wrong here, but I feel like Dad Meeks really didn't need to do that. The sheriff has already seen that Fenton might be lying, so if Fenton ever came to him again, he would dismiss it even more quickly. It was to his dad's advantage to let the guy go. But maybe he had to kill him because the angel said this would lead to someone dying in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. While burying the sheriff, their father still maintains that he's never killed a man before and that Fenton made him commit murder, leading to him attacking Fenton.
Dad, no! Dad, don't!
But what's curious is I think the film agrees with me that this murder was completely avoidable and that their dad has possibly lost his way. Because earlier in the film, we saw an episode of Davy and Goliath, a claymation Christian animation, and it specifically spoke about not blaming others, even God, for your own actions. So perhaps, regardless of whether you believe his delusions or not, the film is trying to tell us that none of this is going to plan. At home, Adam is sent inside, but Fenton is taken into the shed, and this is when his dad reveals that the angel told him Fenton was also a demon, and that's what he's been trying to reject. But instead of killing him, he's just going to starve him in a dirt hole for a few days, because we're in the land of the rational. The next morning, Adam brings Fenton some water and tells him he'll be in the hole for a week. After 7 days, his dad asks if God has spoken to him, but Fenton just tells him there is no God, leading to more time in the hole. It's amazing that if you took this moment and then looked at the beginning of the film when we first met their dad and put them together, the contrast would be astounding. But because the process from there to here has been so gradual, and everything has taken a logical progression, you don't notice how different it is. It's not jarring. And of course, the dad character still feels like the same character, which is a testament to the writing and Paxton's acting. Fenton narrates that he lost track of time, so we don't really know how long he's been in the hole, but eventually, in his delirium, Fenton does indeed receive a vision from God. Eventually, Fenton stops responding, so they rush to get him out and give him some water. Fenton tells his dad he saw God talking to him like a true believer while eating, which of course pleases his dad. And within a week, Fenton and his dad are hunting another demon, and make note of what Fenton says here.
My first demon was to be Brad White from Dallas.
They knock on the guy's door, pretending that they got a flat tire, and certainly compared to the other demons they've destroyed,
Brad, who is it?
Mind your business, you fucking bitch!
this guy might not be hiding it so well. Surprisingly, the guy is willing to help and takes them round back to his concussion shed. No idea why he calls it that. However, the plan doesn't go perfectly as Fenton alerts the guy, leading to his dad getting injured. But the guy does get knocked unconscious. That's why he called it that. They quickly get him back to the hole, and Fenton is ready to deliver the killing blow. Once again, hands are placed on the guy and his crimes are supposedly revealed. However, we still don't see anything, possibly suggesting that Fenton isn't as converted as he claims, because as he raises the axe, he brings it down into his dad's chest instead. And before their dad dies, he whispers something into Adam's ear. And once again, depending on how you interpret this movie, his death could mean one of two things. Firstly, the rational side might think that this is Fenton stopping his ruthless serial killer father. On the other side, this might be Fenton realizing his demonic destiny, and this is exactly what the angel warned their dad about if he had ignored its words. But we're in the last 15 minutes of this film now, and this is where it gets nuts. Fenton removes the tape from the guy's mouth to rescue him, but you remember how eager Adam was to destroy a demon? No! Yeah, he was very eager. We then shift back to the present, and Fenton explains how they buried their dad in the rose garden and convinced the police he simply disappeared. And now Fenton decides he doesn't want to talk anymore. After driving the rest of the way in silence, they eventually arrive at their destination, and this shot here is the shot Bill Paxton was the most critical about. This is supposed to be the Meeks burnt down house. Paxton says in the commentary it's quite hard to tell what we were looking at, which I have to agree with, especially because it's never mentioned or addressed. Fenton takes the detective to the rose garden and he asks about the promise he made to his brother, with a masterful transition to the rose garden in the past. Their dad is quickly buried, and that's when the promise is made.
If you ever destroy me, promise me you'll bury me here.
But that doesn't make any sense, does it? Fenton told the detective that that is what Adam asked him. But, as I said, we've been dealing with an unreliable narrator. The detective is just as confused, saying it doesn't make any sense. And now the truth starts coming out.
Yes, it does. If the man standing in front of you is Adam Meeks.
He also says that he hasn't killed anyone, and it's Fenton who was the killer. However, the film doesn't really give enough gravitas to that moment. It's the revelation that turns the entire film on its head, and it's just a dull piece of dialogue. However, what is interesting about it is if you remember back to the last victim we saw.
My first demon was to be Brad White from Dallas.
Adam was being truthful. That was his first. And considering Fenton became the God's Hand killer, maybe his dad was right. He was a demon. But wait, there's more. Fenton, now Adam, insists on showing the detective where he buried Fenton, Doyle wisely taking his gun out. They find Fenton's grave, but not just that. There is a lot more graves, way more, than the God's Hand victims. But that's just it. This isn't where Fenton buried people. This is where Adam buried demons. We then see what really happened at the start with Fenton. The notes weren't for the cops, they were for Adam to find him, because Fenton knew Adam would come for him eventually. There was no phone call, Fenton was just on Adam's list. And Fenton knows his brother is behind him, but accepts his fate. And going back to the very start, when we met the boys and they sang that song,
And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on a tap. Ouch.
perhaps Fenton being cast as the devil in the song was some subtle foreshadowing. Now what's funny is for a movie, that's a pretty decent twist, and the film could just coast on that to the finish line. But this is what makes it stand out, because the twists keep coming thick and fast. Adam tells the detective that he's always believed, and that's when we see the original victims and the visions his dad got when he touched them. Adam also saw those visions, and those people were indeed murderers. That certainly gives credence to his dad's story, but you could still argue that it was just a shared delusion. His dad told him what he would see, and thus he did. But wait, there's still more. Doyle, finally realizing what he's got on his hands, raises his gun. However, Adam rattles the detective.
That's not gonna bring your mother back, is it?
Leading Doyle to attack Adam. Now, what I love about this next revelation is that throughout the film, at least for me, I feel like it was implying that Adam killed Doyle's mother. But when the detective attacks, Adam grabs his arm, and that's when we see a vision of the detective's mother, and it's revealed that Doyle killed her. And once we're out of the vision, if you listen to what the detective says...
How did you know?
Doyle says, how did he know? They both saw the same vision. That's pretty conclusive proof right there that the visions are real. Also, this is why Adam was very careful to never touch Doyle before this moment. And to make sure, Adam places his hand on the detective again as we see the whole grisly murder take place. The vision has seemingly incapacitated Doyle as Adam places him in a grave and reveals Doyle will be Fenton's last victim as he picks up the axe. The name Otis showing us it's the same one. Doyle tells him that he's been seen and people will know, but Adam, just like his father, says God will protect him as he brings down the axe. It's insane how much this film has changed in the last 5 minutes. But what's significant is I've seen this twist being pulled off in other films before. But what this film did differently is that it held its nerve. It didn't pepper the film with obvious clues. The only clues that are there are clues in retrospect. And speaking of which, while editing this video, I noticed another more subtle clue. When the film transitions into flashbacks, it uses a slow fade. However, perhaps as a clue to Adam's deception, when he tells Doyle about receiving a call from his brother, there is no slow fade, it's a hard cut. What makes this even more interesting is this happens only one other time in the film, and that's when their dad tells Fenton about seeing the angel with the flaming sword. So perhaps their dad, in a bid to convince Fenton of his benevolence, made up this fantastical story. That's why it's a lot more dramatic and not necessarily in keeping with the rest of the film. The next day at the FBI, Doyle is missing and something strange has happened. We saw Doyle's partner see Adam in the office, but now he can't remember his face, it's just a blur. And even weirder, when they look at the CCTV, interference stops them from seeing Adam's face. They do recognise his name though as they raid Fenton's house. They find Doyle's name on a list and his bloody badge, along with all the people Fenton killed, so at the very least they found the God's Hand killer. And remember when Doyle said this?
You know, you're pretty good at this. You ever think about becoming a cop?
Well, Doyle's partner goes to the sheriff's office to meet with the sheriff, and it's none other than Adam. But the agent doesn't recognise him at all. And the film ends with the agent thanking Adam for his help and a handshake. And because no visions occurred, Adam knows...
You're a good man, Agent Hall.
And one last revelation for you, the sheriff's receptionist is Adam's pregnant wife and accomplice, so he'll have someone to carry on his work. But also it explains how, at the start, she was able to convince Doyle the sheriff wasn't available. And the film ends with Adam staring into space ominously, for just a little bit too long so it comes off as a bit goofy. One last bit of weirdness though. Just as the film is about to fade to black, we can see 2 young boys ride into frame on scooters. That's actually the actors for young Adam and young Fenton. I'm not sure if it was deliberate, but Bill Paxton did say he liked how it made the film seem like it's set in a strange Twilight Zone world. So that was Frailty, and my God, no pun intended, this is the most ambivalent I've ever felt over a film. Not of its quality, because it's an incredible film, but whether it's a good or bad ending. If the people Adam is killing are indeed killers, then you could argue he's doing good. The film leaves just enough doubt, though, to make you wonder if it's all a coincidence. But the biggest thing is, if Adam and his dad are right, demons are amongst us and it's the end times, Frailty is basically saying that the crazy doomsday cult extremists are right. Which for me is a very uncomfortable thing to think about. You could show me all the meticulously detailed blood and gore you want, and I wouldn't bat an eyelid. But this film made me feel uncomfortable. On the acting standpoint, I'm surprised how good the two boys were. Kids in films such as these can be very annoying, but fortunately that never happened, and I must admit it's a rather ballsy move to put kids in a film about serial killers and show it from their point of view. For Powers Booth, it was an interesting one, because I found he always has a nefarious edge to the characters he plays, so for Doyle, it added to the revelation that he was a murderer quite perfectly. Matthew McConaughey really had his work cut out for him, having to basically play two characters and convincingly pull off a deception. Also, a subtle thing I noticed at the end, when everything has gone to plan, you can see a subtle air of superiority he's feeling, and dare I say, smugness. Last but not least, Bill Paxton is incredible in this film. For such a nice guy, he plays horrible people who do horrible things really well. But hey, was he even a horrible person in the end? Frailty is the perfect example of how Bill Paxton mastered both acting and directing to make an incredible film that I won't be soon forgetting. It really is such a shame that Bill Paxton never got to make any more films. However, I will talk about the very last thing he ever directed, because it is worth a watch. It's a short film called Tattoo. Again, starring Powers Booth. It's about a man asking an old tattoo artist, played by James Hong, to create a very specific tattoo. This tattoo has immense power, as the tattoo artist recounts the tale of the man who had it last. It's certainly not a complete story. It seems Bill Paxton liked to do a lot of ambiguous storytelling, but it is a fun short film that you can find on YouTube. And I do hope more will appreciate Bill Paxton as a director, and not just as this guy.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel, where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions, and movie watch-along nights. So join me live if you wish to see stunning moments of strategy just like this one. You, trade with me. Oh! That was a mistake! That was a mistake! Holy shit! What? Fuck! The link is in the description, so I'll hopefully see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.